fascinating talk. And hopefully we'll come to some of these questions that other people are asking questions. So hopefully we'll be able to relate back to these plenary. But one of the points about this framing, the Iqbal's framing of Islam is travel, and the relationship of travel to Islam is one of the questions I had in my mind, but actually where God fits into this whole perspective. And of course there's a whole, I mean, this is basically the entry point to the theology aspect of facet of theology, and quite novel, and at the same time was sort of radical and also traditional negotiation of what God is actually. What is God in Iqbal's theology, which Dr. Gani is going to be talking about. So Mahbub Gani is a lecturer here in engineering, but some of you also know him for his role in IMACE, and in particular as the coordinator of the CRG, Critical Reading Group, which is, so Fuad mentioned this, I'll mention it again. It's, if you like what's going on today, this kind of thing happens every week over at King's. Every Tuesday night, these kinds of discussions go on, not only by Iqbal, but about other kind of relevant issues in Islam, in philosophy and sociology and politics. It's a sort of reading group, discussion group, seminar series. If you are not aware of this, then perhaps I'm sure Mahbub will be happy to give you details if you're interested in participating. So I suppose I'll give it over to Dr. Gani to talk about God in Islam.
Thank you very much. Salam alaikum wa rahmatullah. So I'm delighted to address you today on the remarkable singular contribution to Islamic thought and philosophy by Iqbal. Especially pleased that such a diverse and interesting range of people turned out to participate in what I hope will be what is already proving to be a stimulating, education-inspiring day. And thank you very much to Roger Reid Majid for accepting the invitation to join us and presenting a superb talk. Thank you. So in my presentation I'll be exploring how Iqbal reconstructs key aspects of Islamic theology in order to make possible a life-enhancing, creative relationship with God. Now for the contents of my presentation, I will actually be performing reasonably close reading of chapters 2 and 3 of the Reconstruction of Islamic Thought, the shortened to Reconstruction. Iqbal performs such a virtuoso synthesis of complex ideas drawn from diverse thinkers that I can't begin to do justice to the quality and the significance of his ideas. And also, regrettably, due to my lack of time and more honestly, my own inadequacies, poetic inadequacies, I'm not going to be able to discuss how Iqbal develops and animates and dramatizes these themes in these 2 chapters through his poetry, but I think some of you did an excellent job of that already. So we should begin by asking ourselves, what is it that Iqbal is doing in the Reconstruction? Now, Iqbal lives in times where he witnesses the degeneration of Islamic culture, practice, and consciousness more generally. His philosophical work, and especially his poetry, is designed to interrupt and reverse the cultural and intellectual atrophy that he thinks has befallen the Muslim community around him. These are themes that he develops later on in the Reconstruction, in particular in chapter 5, the spirit of Muslim culture. And I think it is in the beginning of this chapter where Iqbal presents something like his manifesto for Muslim revival. His ambitions are grand, to restore a connection to the prophetic spirit. The prophet is the one who ascends to the highest heaven, but refuses, unlike the mystic, to remain in blissful union with God. He returns to the world to engage in work of creative moral genius. As Iqbal says, the prophet returns to insert himself in the sweep of time with a view to control the forces of history and thereby to create a fresh world of ideals, to desire to see his religious experience transformed into a living world force that is supreme in the prophet. End of quote. And it is the same ardent desire that runs through Iqbal's veins and gives life to his writing. Though Iqbal sees religious experience as the vital force animating revival, this has to be submitted to what he calls the pragmatic test. We are to examine, in his words, the type of selfhood that he has created, and the cultural world that has sprung out of the spring of his message. There's clearly a political dimension to Iqbal's motivations, but to restrict Iqbal's project to a purely political and nationalist project is a profound mistake. To do this is to ignore the obvious value Iqbal attaches to religious and mystical experience. The full title of the book is, after all, the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. And chapter 1 of the book is devoted to a preliminary analysis and phenomenology of the kinds of consciousness that are precipitated by mystical experience. Iqbal refuses in this chapter to reduce such experiences to conventional psychology and accords them an irreducible truth. There is thus an important empirical aspect informing Iqbal's philosophical and political musings. This empirical dimension is developed in the Reconstruction, but it is in Iqbal's poetry that we have a record, I would suggest, of Iqbal's own mystical experiments, and the opportunity to reenact it for ourselves. Now, the question, of course, is why should a revival grounded in mystical experience require thought, theology, and controversially a concept of the nature of God to be reconstructed? Well, the answer actually is in chapter 5 that I just read from. There's no guarantee that the mystical approach will lead to a transformation of life, the mystic's life and the life around him or her. For the mystic may refuse to return from the delights and repose of unitary experience. Iqbal remarks or reproduces this interesting illustrative statement by famous Muslim saint Abdul Quddus of Gango, where he says, Muhammad of Arabia ascended the highest heaven and returned. I swear by God that if I had reached that point, I should never have returned. So I propose that what determines the nature of the reaction response to such extraordinary experience, the kind of subjectivity that is precipitated, is the way in which we think about and relate to God. Iqbal detects a Neoplatonic and Magian influence in Islamic thought, which he describes as a crust that has grown over Islam. And he thinks that this can lead to relegating God to a changeless entity, thereby conceiving him, to quote him, as utter inaction, a motionless, stagnant neutrality, and absolute nothing. Moreover, the quest after a nameless nothing cannot, for Iqbal, satisfy modern minds, which with its habits of concrete thinking desires a concrete living experience of God. Now, in a nutshell, what I'm going to kind of elaborate on for the rest of my presentation, what Iqbal does is to be true and faithful to the full meaning of a very important name of that's attributed to God, Al-Hayy, which literally means living. And also the attribution of the name Ad-Dahr to God, which means time. And this comes from a famous hadith Qudsi, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, is reported to have said that do not vilify time, Ad-Dahr, for if you vilify Ad-Dahr, you vilify God. The end result for Iqbal will be a vitalization of God, bringing him into closer contact and within the reach of human experience. But he will also need to elevate the status of human self, by exposing and drawing our attention to its full infinite possibilities, something that he so wonderfully performs through his poetry. And this is something that Rabia later on will be talking about in relation to the idea of Khudi.